One of the many disorders that affect our society, and one which is very hard to cope with, is schizophrenia. As someone who doesn't have it, I'll never be able to experience what it's like. However, today I'm going to interview my friend who has first-hand experiences.
Hello, my name is Adrian, and today I am here to talk about my mental disorder. I am schizoaffective.
Oh, Adrian, when did these symptoms start?
Well, for me, they started around the age of 8, I would say, and up to now is how I've been with these symptoms.
Hmm. How do you cope with these symptoms?
Well, for me, some of my symptoms have different ways that I cope with. For example, one of them is I can listen to music. Music is something that really helps me cope. It actually calms me with anxieties, and sometimes I'll be in the moment of an episode. The music helps me calm or
Hmm.
cope, in other words.
It's interesting, yeah. Music tends to help a lot of people when it comes to a variety of disorders and stress in general. I know even for someone without schizophrenia, I also listen to music whenever I'm in a bad spot, and it also helps me get out of it. How frequent are your symptoms? Are they common, or do they happen monthly, weekly?
Well, for me, my symptoms are a daily occurrence. If we're taking all of my symptoms as a whole, then yes, I would say they are a daily occurrence. Though I do have specific symptoms that sometimes happen at different times, though for me, I have not been able to find an agenda for these symptoms.
Okay, so they just seem to happen at random. Have you noticed by any chance, like, you get more symptoms at certain times? Like whenever you're stressed out naturally, just as a person stressed out, you find yourself having more symptoms and hallucinations than when you're not?
I would like to say yes, but there have been times where I have been completely calm or minding my own business, in other words, and I'll be hit with an episode out of the blue. So I would like to say yes, but for me personally, it's very hard to say.
Hmm. And when we're talking about your hallucinations, what do they look like? What do you see in your hallucinations? I know from person to person, they see different things, different people, they have different names for these things. What do you see?
Well, I see a few, but I'll name off some main ones. One of them is named Lucy. Lucy is a guy, and he's, I would say, quite tall. He's about 11 foot, um, very hunched over, very slender, I would say, and he has almost this ash black skin,
Hmm.
long hands, long fingers, and he has what would be kind of like this almost tuxedo-like suit, black tie, white inside shirt. But then he has those almost stereotypical. He has a stereotypical lunch bag over his head. You know those brown square ones? He has
Hmm.
one of those over his head. I don't know what his face looks like, but
Interesting.
over the back he has in Sharpie for a face, two dots and a simple horizontal line, and that is Lucy. That is one of my main symptoms. Another main symptom that I have is known as Alice. She is pretty much what would be a 5'8", I would say, about 5'8". Yeah. She's a very, very pale female, slender as well, in almost this kind of white, I won't say wedding dress, but almost like a, I would say like a ballroom dress. And then she also has the same kind of bag over her head, just like Lucy. She's more what would be human, I could say.
When you describe Lucy, I mean, whenever you hear that, for the average person, seeing that would scare them. I imagine even for you, it scares you because these are things that not everybody would see, and you see them at random times, at random locations, if I'm not mistaken. Do you think that seeing these things over the years and constantly dealing with them has made you in any way more mentally resilient?
I can say that yes, for me, but I can say also that there are times where that goes right out the door. You see, when starting when I was 8, well, the first symptom I had was Lucy. When I saw him, um, I was scared immediately. Seeing something like that image at that age definitely scared me. But as time, um, I grew, and I would say I've grown to it. There's times I get startled, yes, but I've grown used to them. You know, it's not necessarily an everyday kind of hurdle to say. Though there are times where no matter how resilient I can be, it just hits me with anxiety. I don't know why it does, but it's just a sudden urge of anxiety, and I just feel like I can't control it sometimes.
Well, when you look into schizophrenia, a lot of the times they say that when you're undergoing these hallucinations, you'll be hit with these spells of anxiety and fear. Even if you feel like you're completely in control and you're used to these things, sometimes you just don't have control over these emotions. And I imagine that's probably what you go through, regardless of if you're used to them or not. Speaking on that, do you find yourself hindered by these effects? Like,
I would say one of the symptoms that I have is I hear screaming. Actually, it's mainly an auditory hallucination. I don't really have any visual cues or any other cues. It's just mainly auditory. It sounds like just so many people, almost in what would be a house fire burning. So the screams. It's just sometimes it just is too much. I'll break down and I just can't handle it. There's times where it's not as loud, I would say. There's not as many quantity as of how many voices that I hear. Sometimes it gets annoying, I can say. But for the most part, when it gets quite bad, it is definitely something that gets in the way of an everyday life.
I imagine the first time you experienced those things when you were younger and having no idea what you had, it must have been horrifying to just hear these things. And it's impressive, and I find it impressive that you have to deal with it almost constantly, and yet you're able to remain stable. Something to think about is how often these things happen and how intense they can get, and how you manage to remain intact after all this. I think that's definitely a sign of that earlier mentioned resilience. Now, speaking on help and others, when you break down, how does your family? What kind of things have been done to help you improve?
Sometimes I'll break down. They'll notice me breaking down. I've broken down in front of my family a few times, more than a few times, I'd actually say. And they've helped me along the way. They've made sure I was all right. They made sure I haven't done any massively drastic things yet, which I'm very thankful for. And I can say it's definitely a blessing to have a family and someone to support
Most definitely.
my mental health.
Yeah, handling things like that alone is, I'd say, impossible for most or for anyone. But having help next to you is always going to be way better than handling this alone. Speaking of which, one of the most controversial things involving schizophrenia is, the diagnosis of it and how a doctor would treat it. What have you found on the medication side to be least effective for you?
For me, recently, one of the things that helps me with part of my schizophrenia, I would say, is I have some mood stabilizers. As I am schizoaffective, which means I'm schizophrenic with bipolar tendencies, having those large mood swings or those periods of, let's say, darker times, um, they can definitely help. So far, though, I haven't found, for me, any antipsychotic medication that benefits me. Because one thing with mental illness is that you have to find a medication that's right for you. Not every medication is going to be a general thing that works for every single person. Everyone's different when they have their medication. Something for me, like let's say, for example, something for me that helps with my mood stabilizations will not work for someone else. Or someone who takes a different antipsychotic medicine than I might differ from what I take.
So you think that for you personally, would you say that, the more natural ways of coming down from an episode, like music or support, have you found those to be more or less effective than you'd say than maybe mood stabilizers or medication? Which have you found to be more helpful?
Well, I could definitely say in the moment of, let's say, when my symptoms are active, or an episode, in other words. I could definitely say more natural ways, such as music, or like how I said before, the family support, definitely helps me right on time, immediately. Um, though like I said, the change might not be extremely drastic, there's a change, definitely, right away on that. Now, for the medication that I take, as I said, I can't find necessarily a good antipsychotic yet, I would say, but those various symptoms that I get from schizoaffective disorder, such as like the mood swings, depressive episodes, I do say that the mood stabilizers and medications as such do help. There's definitely a difference that you can tell, though it does take time to get used to the medication.
Now back to your early life. When you're going through, like, let's say elementary school, how did these symptoms affect you in that? You know, being away from your parents and, you know, people who would really support you for a long period of time. How would you go through those days of sort of being alone? And did you ever have any breakdown while you're away from your family?
I can say yes, I did, though they didn't know I was schizophrenic at that time. I honestly just recently in 2016 actually was diagnosed with schizophrenia. At that time, I did have friends and I did have a good support, teachers, various type of, emotional support. I even had an emotional support dog as well. But it did get to me a lot more than I would say now, because at that time I was a lot younger, and being in the mind of what I would say when I was 8, more recent experiences would be very scary to me, more so than they are now. Even if sometimes that anxiety would just be overbearing, it's just that overall from the new experience, it's very, very surprising.
And that leads to another interesting point. Sometimes there'll be overlapping diagnosis of certain illnesses, and because of it, when things are overshadowed, they'll account one of your symptoms to another symptom, and they will never realize that it's something else until it's too late. So I imagine for them, they thought it was your autism acting up, when in reality, it was your schizophrenia. So that makes you wonder how much of these people are out there that suffer from something like autism are actually suffering from another effect or another symptom from another entirely different disorder, and they don't even know it yet because of misdiagnosis. So for you, that's a perfect example. What age were you diagnosed with autism?
I was diagnosed at the age of 5. I was diagnosed with, I was classically diagnosed, and I was actually mute for a while. I never spoke at all until I turned 6. I was more verbal at that point, and it was still more that people would lean towards my autism, and they would think I was having various types of meltdowns, or even sometimes I was overwhelmed by too much sound.
I guess another question, segueing from that, how has it changed you? How do you think it would have made you any different if you didn't have any of these things? Do you think you would have changed at all?
Well, I can definitely say that if I wasn't schizophrenic and I didn't have these symptoms or anything for the matter, I can definitely say I would have been changed differently. I can say I would be a less depressed person. I wouldn't be such I would say, volatile person when it comes to mood, and various things like these episodes wouldn't have to be such a hurdle. And I feel like I could at that point be more, in a way, resilient, even though I did say that the schizophrenia has made me mentally resilient. I feel like it also at the same time is something like, it feels like a weakness in a way. And sometimes when I think about it, if I never had schizophrenia, it always makes me wonder, like, if I would be stronger or if I wouldn't. It's very fun to entertain that thought.
I think anyone going through any sort of mental disorder is mentally strong. Even if they don't think they are, it's a lot to cope with. And to carry that burden every day for your entire life, or even for a part of your life, is difficult. And I think there should be more credit given to you guys. So speaking on your mental endurance, I'd say, do you think in any way you've learned anything
Well, having this disorder definitely has taught me patience, actually, a lot of the time. Going back to one of my symptoms, the screaming. For me, there's only two types of episodes I would have. I would have one where it's either long periods of it, but it's not really as loud or as much in quantity, or it would be more shorter periods, and it would be extremely overwhelming because of the volume and the amount of voices that I would hear. Now, dealing with the first one I mentioned, I can say it takes a lot of patience to not get aggravated, frustrated, all kinds of things. At first, I can definitely say it wasn't really a pretty sight, but I learned to eventually, in a way, get used to it. It still is troublesome, I can say. Sometimes, I can't even hear myself think, or even others say things, for the matter. But there are times where it just doesn't matter sometimes. It's just too overbearing in some instances.
Hmm. I guess one last question that I have for you is, if you could, would you wish to help others go through these symptoms, and would you wish to be sort of a helper for the younger generations?
I would say that I definitely would, as I believe that the the stigma on mental illness as a whole needs to be removed. Although everyone has their free will, so I don't expect it to be anytime soon. But definitely, I would help the younger people, as well as not just younger, but older as well. Because yes, age does have I would say, a factor in being more intense, but that doesn't necessarily disregard the older people would actually have schizophrenia. Their problem could be just as bad as someone younger with schizophrenia, or any mental illness, to be precise.
Hmm. So I believe that in the end, schizophrenia's hallucinations, voices, and other effects tend to make it a difficult disorder to cope with. So I ask, what advice do you have for others dealing with schizophrenia?
I would say for any other people who deal with this mental disorder, um, to find a very helpful and very understanding support group. Having support is overall one of the best things you can have. No matter how difficult it can be, having some type of support system, whether it's a family or friends.
It's been a very good time talking to you about these symptoms and schizophrenia in general. Well, thank you for sharing with us, Adrian.
Thank you for having me.